And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
Today is Friday. Thank you, Greta, for once again alerting us to that simple fact. I mean, compared to the other facts she alerts us to, that's pretty on the nose. But hello and welcome to Climate Change. Anthony, I can see you on the back end of my screen just laughing. I like that you like the Today is Friday thing / dislike Greta. But hello and welcome to Climate Change Roundtable, the show. I've done my whole bit every time. Thanks for joining us all. And for once, for the first time in like a month, we have all 4 of us here. I feel like it's been either me not here or Sterling or just, Linnea. But Sterling, you've been gone for a while. Welcome back to the show. It's good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I can see your lighting is way more yellow than usual. It's very
well. My lighting is differently situated, so we can talk about that some other time.
Yeah, I didn't even notice really.
Alexa, turn off the studio lights.
Okay.
And dealing with his machines is Anthony in the top right. Anthony, good to have you with us today.
Yeah, well, it's Friday, as Greta points out, and Friday is our day to do everything completely opposite of what Greta does. We're not having any protests, we're anything like that. We're just simply pointing out some facts here to people that are factually based.
Yeah, right. And Linnea, I noticed you got your Twitter handle and your name here, and you told me earlier this week, I believe, that ever since Elon took over Twitter, your account is finally getting some traction. It seems that it was being throttled a little bit, so that's good. Everyone give Linnea a follow. But how you all doing, or how you doing?
Good. I mean, it's weird. Twitter is weird. I don't like it, but I'm trying to promote our work and everything a bit more. So that's been fun. Yeah.
I don't know if I could. We'll get to it in a sec. I just don't know if I could personally do Twitter because every time I go there, within like 1 to 2 minutes, my faith in humanity decreases and just like my general mood is knocked down a few pegs. So thank you for being the one of us that goes on there and actually engages with that platform. It might be better now. I don't know. I don't want to be part of it.
I'm in that cesspool every day.
Oh, are you really? Oof.
Every day.
And for that, I'll pour one out for you. I mean, we're not going to discuss it, but I don't know if you all have seen that the White House is like actually getting they're not doing fact checking. They're doing like our users say, and they like took down a post for the first time because they're no longer being shielded by Papa Twitter. It's a pretty funny thing, but that's not the topic of today's discussion, even though it is relevant to everything we do because we are one of those throttled viewpoints. But today's discussion is related to the upcoming COP27 climate conference. Happens every year, minus I assume they didn't do it during COVID. I don't remember. I like to not think of those 3 years of my life. But yeah, so I mean, with COP27 coming up, obviously there's a flurry of articles coming out just pushing the idea that we're heading towards an impending catastrophe, which Linnea and I had this discussion this morning. I mean, realistically speaking, like if people didn't just watch the news or like see these articles constantly coming at them, do you think anyone would really believe we're going towards some impending crisis? I don't think anyone would if you just observe the real world. But we have some articles here. Before I bring them up, have you all seen just like the flurry of coverage saying that there is a climate crisis just in the last week or two?
It's not the last week or two.
Yeah, I mean, it's always
not the last. Come on, it's since the media decided to act as a single unit. They decided a year and a half ago. We're not even going to call it the climate change anymore. We're going to call it climate crisis. That's what we got to do. They decided that in a very public way. They said we've got to start doing this. So it's not new. In the words of a great philosopher, Nietzsche, it's eternal recurrence. In the words of a good songwriter, David Talking Heads songwriter whose name's escaping me, same as it ever was. So this isn't new.
Yeah, I mean, and before it was climate change, it was global warming. And then when they realized that, oh, global warming leaves way too much room for us to be wrong.
And before that, it was global cooling. And before that, it was, pick your environmental disaster. It's the problem is always the same. Humans are causing deadly, terrible things. And the solution is always the same. Ever bigger government controlling our lives.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that in any way. But so let me go ahead and just pop up an article that
Thank you, X-Man. David Byrne. Yes.
Nice. So this actually came out this cut and paste commentating. Sorry, I was just looking at the comment section. So this article came out this morning from AP News, and it says the UN chief warns planet is heading towards climate chaos. So this is kind of what I'm referring to when I say that there's just a flurry of news related towards the crisis, at least right now. But I think it's an interesting way to kind of frame how they're going to, how they're going to frame this COP27. So if I scroll down a bit here, they says, let me read from this section. The UN chief said the 27th annual conference of the 198 parties of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, that is a mouthful, better known as COP27, must be the place to rebuild trust and reestablish the ambition needed to avoid driving our planet over the climate cliff. Linnea, does that section right there kind of indicate that they've lost trust in people and that we are heading towards a climate catastrophe? I mean, they're saying that we need to rebuild it.
Well, in part, I think that it's because they were anticipating it being a lot easier to convince everyone to give up their lifestyle since it was so easy to do it for COVID.
Yeah, that's what I was
thinking. I think that they were really anticipating that the COVID thing would make people more used to the idea of having, being locked down so they couldn't travel. Having dietary restrictions based on whether or not certain foods were available. With these people, it's always about red meat.
Yeah.
So I think that they were anticipating that we would be able to be shifted onto the climate issue a lot easier, but people are pretty much just ignoring it the way that they always have for the most part. And it's very frustrating to them, I think, because you have all of the media, all of the celebrities, government sounding the alarm about this constantly. And the general public isn't inspired by it hardly at all.
Yeah. I mean, there's... Yeah. Oh, no, go in, Sterling.
I mean, that's the thing is poll after poll shows this. It's not just that they thought COVID. They came out of 2015's Paris Agreement and they had what they thought was it was a weird thing. They said that they had what they thought was an agreement, but it was an agreement that was doomed to fail because, as Thomas Hobbes says, covenant without the sword is but words. And there was no sword. There was no enforcement mechanism. There was no, it was all promissory notes with no punishment if you didn't actually pay. And it's not just since 2020 or 2021. It's year after year after year. Countries have failed to meet their targets that they set for themselves. They set on themselves. They failed to meet them. And in fact, actions speak louder than words. It's their actions belie their statements. Every time they meet, they say we're going to have to get really serious and make deeper cuts. And they make these statements, these commitments, and then what they do is they go out and develop a new oil field, or they open up an old coal mine, or they increase coal use. And I'm sorry, but you can't get there from here. You can't reduce emissions. You can't reach net zero if you're opening brand new coal fueled power plants that will be operating till 2070.
Yeah, I love this comment here from Douglas Pollock. Surely Biden will attend COP27 to take a nap again. I don't know if you all saw that last. I know that's a good one.
They have an ice cream stand there for him.
that's hilarious. Now, obviously this article I just put on screen is more generic in nature, but I want to highlight one that actually attempts to take a position, like what's actually going to occur in a physical sense related towards climate change. And Anthony, I'm going to go to you on this, but let me just get it up there first. Yeah. So UNESCO, which is the acronym, United Nations. I'll get it in a moment, but UNESCO finds that some iconic World Heritage glaciers will disappear by 2050. So new UNESCO data highlights the accelerated melting of glaciers in World Heritage sites, with glaciers in a third of sites set to disappear by 2050. But is it still possible to save the other 2/3 if the rise in global temperatures does not exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial period? This will be a major challenge for COP27. So, Anthony, I mean, just looking at the title there, they're claiming that like glaciers are melting at some accelerated rate, and we're going to lose, I think, 1/3 of them. Is there any validity to this statement before we kind of dig into the article?
We've heard this time and time again that glaciers are going to disappear here, or Mount Kilimanjaro, perfect example. When Al Gore came out with his Inconvenient Truth movie, he highlighted Mount Kilimanjaro as proof of global warming, aka climate change, back then. And basically, it was based on the work of an Ohio State University scientist. And this scientist went up there to the top of the mountain and took a lot of photos and said, "Hey, look, the ice is melting." What the scientists missed, or maybe purposely ignored, was the fact that there was no water on the ground from melting ice. But what was going on was there were these ice spires at the top, and there was no water. And that's an important clue. The temperature was still below freezing. What was happening is the ice was sublimating. And that's because it wasn't getting enough precipitation. And the reason it wasn't getting enough precipitation is that all around the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro and up towards the valley preceding it with the prevailing winds, the population was so energy poor that they were cutting down all the trees for firewood. And the trees do evapotranspiration. They put moisture in the air. And so without that additional moisture in the air for the upslope winds, the ice on top of Mount Kilimanjaro was basically sublimating. It was just evaporating into the air. Same thing that happens in your freezer. When your ice cubes turn into little bitty things, that's sublimation. So a lot of these glaciers are really much more proxies and indicators of precipitation than they are of temperature. And it's natural for glaciers to, based on precipitation patterns, to grow and recede. There's nothing new about this. In fact, I found an article back in 1923.
Yeah, I'll pull it up for you.
Yes, that talks about Glacier National Park is under threat. And it's just amazing because they're basically saying here, there's one scientist's opinion. It's always one scientist's opinion, Opinion is not science, by the way. He says very clearly that they would almost disappear in another 25 years. Well, glaciers were going like gangbusters in 1950, and it's always 25 years out or 30 years out, or you can't verify anything. It's just somebody's opinion. They run a model or whatever. And literally, these things never come true. And they're all designed to be part of the whole staging event for COP27. The script is basically, we run out some scary stories in the compliant media. Disaster is coming, tipping points are coming, glaciers are disappearing, the world's at an impasse, and we have to act now. It's our last chance to act now. That's always what they say. And then they go to this big, I call it a climate trade show, because literally that's all it is. They go there, they make big pronunciations, and they say, well, we may not make an agreement. The Earth is in peril. We may not get there. And then at the last minute, a breakthrough. Whoa, a breakthrough. They did it last year and the year before and the year before that. They've had 27 of these meetings, and they haven't accomplished squat.
Yeah. No,
I mean, they've sold a lot of first-class flights for the airline industry.
They have. They put out a lot of emissions, served a lot of first-class, 5-star meals, things like that.
Yeah.
Anthony's right about these glaciers. Look, Kilimanjaro is one example, and I think you can correct me if I'm wrong. We can go back and look at Al Gore's film, but I thought it was supposed to be glacier free by 2020, and here we are in 2022. And
I can pull up the clip if you all want.
If you can find it, I think 2020 was the date it was supposed to be gone by.
Okay.
Under Obama, they put signs in Glacier National Park saying they were supposed to disappear by a date certain, and they subsequently had to pull those signs because the glaciers weren't melting at the rate they said. Back when Pachauri was running the UN climate directorate, I think it was their 5th assessment report. They put out a report and they said, oh, the glaciers in the Himalayas will be gone in 30 years. So that was 10, more than, I guess it maybe was the 4th assessment report. So 10 years ago. And within a year, This is the UN, supposedly the blue ribbon. You know, they own the science, I think is what they said recently. They own the science. Well, within a year of putting out that report, the scientists that actually did the work that was being cited, supposedly, said that's not what we said at all. And in fact, they didn't cite any peer-reviewed literature. They cited what they call blue literature, which was some environmental groups put out a report saying the glaciers in the Himalayas were going to disappear. They didn't cite a single source for the claim. And when the scientists that actually were doing work in the glaciers in the Himalayas said, called them out on it, Pachuri had to walk it back. They had walked their statement back. And the problem is, it never should have been in there in the first place. They weren't looking at peer-reviewed literature. They weren't looking at data. They were, once again, opinion. Someone's opinion.
Yeah, so I got the clip here, and we'll play it in 1 second. Just first off, I've been following the comments as we go. Y'all have some pretty funny stuff in here. I just want to throw one on screen. Let me see if I can get it quickly enough. Here we go from Catherine Burke. With going to green energy, how will the NSA power their Utah warehouse of servers used for spying on Americans at all? Well, that'll be the last thing they cut. So don't worry. That we'll still be getting spied on.
Yeah, they'll have their diesel generators going.
Yeah, right. They're
Yeah.
not running that with solar panels. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
And then someone commented about collaborating with us. Just reach out to us over email. Just Google us, and you can find our media address. That's how you can best contact us. But all right, so here's the Al Gore An Inconvenient Truth clip on Mount Kilimanjaro, which is a good way to kind of highlight how they've been talking about glaciers just completely disappearing down the line. So let me go ahead and get that on screen. And here it is.
This is Mount Kilimanjaro more than 30 years ago and more recently. And a friend of mine just came back from Kilimanjaro with a picture he took a couple months ago. Another friend, Lonnie Thompson, studies glaciers. Here's Lonnie.
Can you pause
with
that
last
right there?
sliver
Yes.
of one of the
Okay, we'll go a little further when it gets down to the base.
Yep.
once mighty glaciers.
All right, look at
Within
that.
the
There's
deck.
no meltwater. None. That's not melting. That's sublimation. And this Ohio State University scientist either ignored it or completely missed it. Now, that's the quality of climate science that was being presented to Al Gore.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, they're all friends of his, so he can trust them.
it's not like he's trying to be an honest guy.
Okay, there will be no more snows of Kilimanjaro.
I made a video.
This is happening.
Wait, before we go, I made a video a while back, like a year ago almost, where I think he said like in 10 years there'll be no snow in Kilimanjaro. That part doesn't matter. But I literally just Googled like that day, Mount Kilimanjaro weather. And for the next 7 straight days, the weather forecast was snow, 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 snow. And I just put it to the Curb Your Enthusiasm jingle. I thought it was pretty good. But it's like no one calls these people on these false predictions. And I mean, well, that's what we're doing. But
Glacier National.
Yeah, go Sterling.
They ignore history once again. Look, I have no doubt that some glaciers are going to melt.
Oh yeah.
You know what? Some glaciers have always melted, and they've generally come back because glaciers wax and wane over history. You've got woodcuts. I mean, there's a reason why they're discovering bodies and wreckage and things under the ice now that's not been seen for 50 years.
Yeah.
Well, hold it. What that means is 50 years ago, there were no glaciers there either, and they got covered up, and now they're reappearing. There's a reason there's woodcuts from little alpine villages in Switzerland of the glaciers melting and them fearing they're going to have to move their entire town because the glacier's not melting, are growing, expanding, and pushing them off the mountainside where they built their village. Well, that happens. They expand, they wane, and I find no evidence that any glaciers melting today are due to human activity. Well, except, Anthony's right. When they cut trees at the base of a glacier mountain for wood or for to start farming there, do slash and burn agriculture, as they did in Mexico and some of the mountains there, and then the soot goes up in the air, lands on the glacier, the sun shines on it, it gets warm, glacier melts. It is human activity. It just ain't climate change.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's 3 problems associated with climate alarmists and scientists that are doing climate change in general. Number one, they think the world is linear. that climate acts in a linear way, where you get from point A to point B, and there's going to be a rise, and it's going to be a smooth line between point A and point B. The world doesn't work like that. The world is chaotic. Things go up and down. All right. They don't really acknowledge that. Their whole thing about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere increasing is a linear thought process, when in fact it's chaotic. And it's very, very complex. Number one, that's the thing they miss. Number two, they ignore other exculpatory evidence. They only look at carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the main control knob for everything. And so they go into it with this thought in their head that they see something that's happened. Well, it must be climate change. And they put on blinders, and they simply ignore all this other stuff. And then the other thing is the over-reliance on models. And the models, again, do things linearly as opposed to chaotically. And so they miss what's right in front of their nose, and you don't have to scratch the surface hardly at all, like it did here with Lonnie Thompson from OSU and the spire, of ice that's sublimation and not melting. They would rather blame global warming, aka climate change, than actually do real science, and that's the failure here.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to it, the Earth's climate is like a complex adaptive system, and just a brief kind of definition of what that is. Essentially, it's trying to predict a system based on like individual components that have so many factors. You can't actually determine the outcome based on the behavior of each individual component. Like, they're adaptive and they build off of each other. And attempting to take this entire system and trace it to one greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, which is carbon dioxide, and then try to say that it is like the driving force behind all of the trends that we've seen in the entire history of the Earth is ridiculous in and of itself. And the fact that we still are even discussing it is a failure on just the media's part, I guess, because they're the ones pushing this for the most part. But all right, so I'm gonna go back to this clip. If it ends up being like just kind of the same thing, we'll pull back and we'll go back to the article we were on. But let's see.
Park. I climbed to the top of this in 1998 with one of my daughters. Within 15 years, this will be the park formerly known as Glacier. Here is what's been happening year by year to the Columbia Glacier. It just retreats every single year. And it's a shame because these glaciers are so beautiful, but those who go up to see
That's
them,
an emotional appeal.
here's what they're seeing every day now.
Oh no, it's calving.
Yeah.
That's what glaciers do, folks.
Yeah, it's like, did this never occur before the Industrial Revolution? All right, we don't need to go any further with this one. So let me just go back to the UNESCO article.
I highly doubt anyone ever saw that particular thing happen at Glacier National Park, since that's clearly an Alaskan glacier over the sea.
Yeah. Oh, clearly the first time that's ever occurred. But
Yeah.
So this is back to the UNESCO article. So the report, and this related to glaciers just disappearing. The report concludes that glaciers, let me make sure it's on screen. Yep. Concludes that glaciers in a third of the 50 World Heritage Sites are condemned to disappear by 2050. Well, that's kind of similar to Al Gore's prediction that Kilimanjaro will be gone by now. Not Kilimanjaro, snow there. Regardless of efforts to limit temperature increases. Okay, well then, what's the point? But it is still possible to save the glaciers in the remaining 2/3 of sites if the rise in temperature does not exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial period. And then this is what I actually thought was really interesting. This report is a call to action. So, okay, it's a political statement then. Only a rapid reduction in our CO2 emission levels can save glaciers and the exceptional biodiversity that depends on them. COP27 will have a crucial role to help find solutions to this issue. UNESCO is determined to support states in pursuing this goal. Linnea, I don't know if you want to jump in here, but does this actually read at all like a scientific statement, or does this just read as like a call to action political?
No, but they're not equipped to make a scientific argument in a context like this. You know, you have to kind of keep in mind there are plenty of people who are very cynical about this, who probably don't actually believe everything that they're saying. But if you are a person who genuinely believed that carbon dioxide was an existential threat to the Earth's biodiversity or whatever it is that they're worried about, you would be making as many emotional and any kind of appeal that works.
Yeah,
you wouldn't be getting yourself tied up in the engineering and atmospheric chemistry and stuff, because a layperson isn't going to respond to that at all.
True.
This is the only take that they really have. It just happens that they also don't have the facts on their side either. So it's especially insulting when you go to you ask them for a source, you try to figure out where they're getting their data from, and it's models all the way down. So
yeah, I'm really glad you brought up your source, because the bottom of this article is actually what I thought was the most interesting. So let me just skip down here. So this is where they talk about the examples of endangered glaciers by region. Anyone who wants to jump in during this, go ahead and jump in. But so we got Africa. According to available data, glaciers in all World Heritage sites in Africa will very likely be gone by 2050, including Kilimanjaro National Park and Mount Kenya. Sure, but let me scroll down to actually the ones that are very interesting. All right, so Europe. Glaciers in Pyrenees Mount Perdu are very likely to disappear by 2050. And then if you just keep going, they keep saying very likely to disappear. So if you look at Yellowstone there on the bottom, glaciers in Yellowstone National Park are very likely to disappear by 2050. And if you go to the bottom, you'd at least expect, I guess they have the report there, but the way that they portray this to us is just saying very likely, as if that's some sort of like evidence, or, I mean, they don't even give us some sort of like probability or estimation. Yeah, Sterling, jump in.
To be fair, I'm guessing, I haven't read the full report, but I'm guessing they're referencing the UN IPCC's rating system, which is a range. I think very likely is 90%, and maybe extremely likely is 95%. But
yeah, like confidence.
They do talk about, when you read the UN reports, they say it's likely, unlikely, somewhat unlikely, unknown, and they give sort of ratings along with that language. So very likely, I don't know what it is in the UN off the top of my head.
Yeah,
I think it's 90%.
Yeah, they do. They'll say like very likely, they'll give like the range of, if we say like high confidence, it's this, and
right, exactly.
I do believe this actually is a new report that comes from UNESCO. I'm not going to dig into that at the exact moment, just because we don't have time to dig through a massive report during this. But Anthony, you just sent me a comic, and I pulled it up. Honestly, this is pretty funny. How they look.
Yeah, well, it's true. And here's what they're not paying attention to: the United States and other industrialized countries in the West have reduced their carbon dioxide over the last 20 years, their emissions, and yet China and India, they keep building new coal plants. They're going gangbusters. But no, we can't talk to China. That would be wrong. We can't get them mad. It's just. I can't even come up with the words for the kind of it just makes me nuts thinking about this, because we're on the path for reduction in the Western countries, and yet they still keep pushing the Western countries for more. Net zero, go.
Yeah.
Well, meanwhile, China and India get a pass. What's up with that?
Yeah,
and not just China and India. Look, I wrote an article, the lead essay for Climate Change Weekly last week. So China's doing more coal. India's doing more coal. Vietnam has decided to go with coal. About 5 South American countries are developing new oil and gas fields. As they go to the UN and say, we need to do more and give them more money for reparations for climate change. And the thing is, so they're really worried about this. They claim they're very worried about this. I wonder how many of the people that participated in this UNESCO report will be at COP. Is it 29? COP 29.
The upcoming one. Sorry.
Yeah.
27.
27. COP 27
Yeah.
in Egypt, right? How many are going to fly there, as opposed to attending virtually? They could do the entire conference virtually. For a year, we proved this. For a year, we did a lockdown for COVID. And all we did was sit in front of our computers like we're doing today, talking and presenting. And life went on. Meetings were held. And yet, I'll wager that almost every person participating in this report will fly from great distances to Egypt to attend the COP meeting. And they will be driven from lecture hall to dinners to tours. I'm sure they do tours at these things as well, and to press conferences. And so they're going to be spewing all this greenhouse gas, but they're convinced just a little bit more will, I think the UN guy said off a cliff.
Yeah.
It's not a tipping point anymore. It's not like the little bird that tips into the water. It's a cliff you're going to fall off of. So by all means, let's 20,000 bureaucrats fly to Egypt for a single conference.
Anthony, you sent me a chart here, which I'm going to throw on screen. So if you want to talk about this, jump on in.
Right. So this is from Dr. Roy Spencer, and we have it on our Climate at a Glance website. And it talks about what happened during the lockdown. Now, Sterling was pointing out that, everybody went to virtual meetings and so forth, like we have on our low carbon meeting here today. And but the bottom line is that it didn't make any difference.
Mm-hmm.
All of the reductions, the lockdowns, the lack of travel, lack of, industrialization, all this stuff didn't even make a blip in the increase in carbon dioxide. Not a blip. And yet these fools, and that's a charitable word for these people, are saying we need to go to net zero. Well, if we did something on the order of we reduced the world economy and emissions by around 20% or so during the COVID crisis, and nothing happened, what are we going to get out of net zero? Except a crashing economy and poverty and starvation and death and destruction.
Yeah.
That's all we're going to get out of net zero.
No, you'll get one more thing, and this is what they're really aiming after: power for them.
Oh yeah,
100%. They'll create the problems, and then they'll come up with the solutions, and the solutions will involve even ever bigger government.
Yeah,
that's always the solution, and most of the time it's the problems that they create. Mm-hmm. I'm going to disagree with Anthony. I don't think they're fools. I don't think they're idiots. Carney sideshow men are not idiots. They're con men, and they're good at it. They get your money. Well, these guys are stealing us blind. They are forcing us to live lives that we wouldn't choose otherwise. And they know what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I could not agree more. I just want to throw something out there for the viewers right now. We're happy to take questions of all of yours at the end of the episode. I will say that we love how much you all comment, but it's hard to, see your questions and then find them at the end. So if you have something, just kind of keep it in mind. And when we reach the last 10 or 15 minutes, throw them in there and we'll go ahead and address them. But, we got a couple articles here. We're going to go to the climate realism one. And then Anthony, you sent that Wall Street Journal article. Do anyone got a preference where we go here?
Sure.
So we're not going to do DeWalt. We're not going to do electric vehicle fires.
Oh, you know what? All right, let's do that next. I totally forgot about that one. Give me a second to pull that up. That one's hilarious. I think it is this. Sterling, why don't you go ahead and jump in with this one?
Well, I mean, it's just, it speaks for itself. They say a picture
it's
worth 1,000 words. Well, there it is. Their new prototype DeWalt, by the way, a company that's known for its power equipment. It's not a startup that's never made power equipment before. These are established, dyed-in-the-wool power equipment, and they got their new electric riding lawnmower. And I've yet to
new product.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Hotter than they thought. And the thing is, I'm not sure whether it was supposedly running at the time or just sitting there. I think they just uncrated it, and it erupted into flames. And that's what Biden wants: little explosions all around this country. He wants 20 million explosions. Look what happened to Florida after Hurricane Ian. These cars got soaked in water. They got left behind. They're soaked in water. And then they started erupting into flames, and the firefighters were having trouble putting these dadgum things out. And they want more of this. This technology is what they're pushing as the cutting edge. I've owned many cars and trucks.
Right.
I have had one that caught fire in all that time. And that was, and so it does happen, but it happens because of poor maintenance. It doesn't happen because it's just sitting there and it decides, and the power source decides, well, I've gotten hot now. Poof.
Yeah.
And that's what Biden wants everywhere. He wants everybody to have one of these in their garage. Well, I'm not in my garage.
It reminds me of the Corvair. Remember Ralph Nader and the Corvair from the 60s, the Death Trap
Unsafe
car?
at Any Speed was the name of his book.
I remember
Ralph
the 60s
Nader
very
made
well.
his whole thing on the Corvair on how much of a death trap the thing was because it would catch fire. And the same thing with the Pinto. Remember the Pinto?
Yep.
The Pinto had a gas tank that if you hardly had an accident, it would burst into flames because it was so badly designed. And yet, so where's Ralph Nader and all these consumer advocates today where we've got cars that are bursting into flame and riding lawnmowers that burst into flame? Where are they at?
In India, they got a scooter problem. They push scooters on everybody. Scooters are very popular there, and these electric scooters are catching fire at bazaars and on the street and at at apartments. It's anywhere you go. These batteries are catching fire in garages. And so Saturday Night Live, I haven't watched it in years, but they used to call themselves the not ready for primetime players. I don't know if they still call themselves that, but this is a technology that's just not ready for prime time.
Yeah. We discussed this, I believe, in the past, and I'm having trouble pulling it up on screen. Linnea, this may have been you, but Alaska had either federal or state program to switch their buses over from gas powered to electric. Do you want to let our listeners, viewers,
Sure.
I guess? Yeah.
Well, one, they have fires, and two, it's really bad because batteries don't survive very well in extremely cold temperatures.
Yeah.
You lose a lot of efficiency from them the lower the temperature gets. Anyone who lives in, the Midwest or any northern state that gets cold knows this. You go to start your car in the morning. It's not necessarily that the engine has a problem, but the battery may well have been drained by the cold overnight. So having buses that depend on cold weather is not so good.
Yeah, I pulled up an
Well,
article.
at least if you're in Alaska, and your bus strands you in the middle of nowhere, you'll freeze to death rather than burn up.
Oh yeah. I mean,
maybe they could get herds of reindeer on standby so that they could hitch them up to the bus.
Tow it, yeah.
Probably a more realistic strategy. All right, so let's go ahead and go to the climate realism article. Just one moment here while I pull that up. Sorry, I've got so many tabs open at this point. It's tough to follow. All right, but so this is a article from, I believe, a guest post we had from Judith Curry. I've got it here, just getting it on screen right now. Yeah, there we go. All right, so coverage of climate shifts as more scientists admits to problems with RCP 8.5. So this is going to cover kind of climate models versus actual observations, something that we're talking about constantly on this show. So I'll just start with the editor's note. Judith Curry writes an analysis on the beginning of a shift in coverage of climate change. As more scientists in the climate debate have begun to admit that the warming predictions associated with representative concentration pathway 8.5, which is RCP 8.5, are implausible. Climate realism has covered this issue before in posts, yada, yada, yada. And multiple peer-reviewed studies have refuted this claim. So, summary. The climate catastrophe isn't what it used to be, circa 2013 with publication of the IPCC AR5 report. RCP 8.5 was regarded as the business as usual emission scenario with expected warming of 4 to 5 degrees Celsius by 2100. Now there is growing acceptance that RCP 8.5 is implausible, and RCP 4.5 is arguably the current business as usual emissions scenario. Only a few years ago, an emissions trajectory that followed RCP 4.5 with 2 to 3 degrees Celsius warming was regarded as climate policy success. As limiting warming to 2 degrees Celsius seems to be in reach, now deemed to be the threshold of catastrophe, the goalposts were moved in 2018 to reduce the warming target to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Climate catastrophe rhetoric now seems linked to extreme weather events, most of which are difficult to identify any role for human-caused climate change in increasing either their intensity or frequency. So I'll go to the chart we have here at the top of the screen, which is observations versus climate models. Anthony, I know you've done a lot with this. If you want to just jump in and kind of explain this to our viewers.
Well, the RCP 8.5 stands for Representative Carbon Pathway. Basically, it's their vision of the future based on what they think carbon dioxide is going to do. And I want to point out that after 2010, that big fat black line in the middle, that's the average of all the different models in the RCP universe. And so it like I said before, their prediction there is linear. It's just straight up. But if you look at the actual measurements there below the satellite and balloon observations, and we don't use the surface temperature record because, as we know, the surface temperature record is totally polluted with UHI and microsite biases, as we've proven time and again. But if you look at the satellite and balloon observations, they're going up and down, and they're not nearly matching. And so that's the whole problem. And even I have an acquaintance, I won't call him a friend, but an acquaintance in the climate community by the name of Zeke Hausfelder. He's a scientist. He worked for the Berkeley Earth Surface Temperature, and now he's running another company with another company. But bottom line is that he at least had the integrity to realize, and published about 2 years ago, the fact that the RCP 8.5, that projection line that they have there, is not realistic. And it's not realistic because he calculated that if you burn all the fossil fuels available on the planet, we can't even get there. It's not possible. And so he says, why are we using this when it's just simply not possible? And of course, he was given the usual, lambasting by the climate community. But now, finally, they're starting to come around and see the reality that it's not possible. So why are we continuing to use it?
Yeah.
Going back to her point, though, if 4.5, I personally think 4.5 may be a little high, because I think the simple climate models that only show about a degree of warming or a degree and a half from doubling reflect reality better. But let's say that it's 4.5, as the new business as usual. As she writes, well, they would have called that a victory. So let's pop a cork. Let's cancel the conference. And because the new business as usual keeps it to 2, no disaster. Some things will be harmed, some things will benefit. This is what Schellenberger has been saying. This is what Bjorn Lomborg has been saying. This is what Steve Koonin says. This is what the people at CO2 Science say, CO2 Coalition say. Look, is the climate changing? Yes. Are humans responsible? Probably partly so, yes. Is it a disaster? No. The world is not going to be an end. Not only is there not a tipping point, there's certainly no cliff. So if 4.5 is the new business as usual, then it's just unclear what the UN and UNESCO are, going crazy about.
It's about money. That's literally that. It's about wealth redistribution, and it's about keeping these empires that they've built around the climate change alarmism going. Money is being thrown at these things in huge amounts. I mean, just for example, just a few months ago, Stanford University got a $1.1 billion grant to set up a climate change center by some guy who was feeling bad because he made a lot of his money in coal and oil and so forth. Guilty conscience, and he throws out $1 billion+ dollars. I mean, imagine what we could do with $1 billion+ dollars. We're always accused of having big oil money, but we never get any. We're running on shoestrings.
What a woman named Catherine Burke wrote a comment. It starts with "There's a witch hunt" of sorts. If you could grab that, right? I think this is a really interesting question. I've got no idea whether it can happen in climate science. I'm skeptical because say what you will about medical science. It's been established for a long time, and they have certain standards that what they're doing is they find out the standards slipped, and it's now time to go back, and they're catching people. In addition, it's not clear to me that there's one, that COVID was a rare thing. It's not clear there's a thing that could drive all policy everywhere in the medical field. So you're not puncturing a huge edifice when you take down this study or that study. Whereas, if you puncture the climate balloon, it goes away. So I'm not sure you could have that, but I think it's an interesting question. I'm wondering if Anthony or Linnea have any thoughts on that.
Well, I'm sure it's the same in the medical community, but the one of the major issues that I have seen in a lot of climate or so-called climate research is that everyone doing any research in biology or in anything else that could be impacted by average precipitation or temperature or anything, all of them reference climate in some way. Um, it's kind of like they're trying to sneak in a little bit of the attention or funding that you can get by linking your work to climate change. Additionally, the peer review, and this is something I think that Anthony could probably speak on a lot better than I could, but the peer review is all kinds of messed up, and I'm sure it is in medicine as well as the atmospheric sciences or geology or biology, anything. um, it's become a lot more pal review than peer review. You have people who are friends, who are buddies with each other, reaching out and saying like, "Hey, can you review my work or whatever?" It's kind of like, I don't know if you ever, when I was in school, every once in a while we'd have a project that was um, a like a student graded project, so your paper would be passed around and other people in the class would grade it. Well, if you made sure that your paper only went to your friends for grading, then you could get a lot better of a score on it. And I think that's part of what's happening.
Did we lose Sterling? Oh, yes, I guess we did. And you have no audio. You're muted.
My bad. Yeah, Sterling will be back in a second. He just had to step away for a moment. Linnea, do you have anything to say about what Linnea just brought up regarding funding? Am I still muted?
Nope. Anthony.
I'm sorry.
No worries. We can move forward. So let me just kind of quickly scroll through it, see if we have any other questions here. But Linnea, you mentioned just how they want to kind of just get climate change in there just to possibly increase the probability that they're funded. One of our viewers wrote a comment that essentially said, let me see where it is here. Let's see. Essentially the comment was like, you need to get the government out of funding this. And I agree with that. Like, the government is inherently, I mean, we vote people in that have one viewpoint or the other, and then we have more people that we don't vote in who we have no real way of keeping tabs on that are clearly biased. And if they're the ones that determine where funding goes, then there's a clear monetary incentive to produce research that goes along with the viewpoints of those that dictate where money goes. So yeah, I mean,
right, but it's not like private organizations in the, like we were just talking about with these, like oil baron billionaires trying to make up for past wrongs or whatever it happens to be, giving climate reparations of a sort. It's not like there isn't corruption outside of government as well.
True, but I guess it's government. Like, as far as government goes, we don't actually have any competing. There's no competing governments. So, and there's no way to really keep tabs on. It's less possible to keep tabs on what they do and what's going on behind the scenes than it is with private enterprise. Would be the argument I'd make against that. I see that Sterling's back here, but I do see where you're coming at from that. All right, let's see what other questions that we have. I like this quote here from David Burton. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. Anthony, I see you nodding there. I mean, this is wholeheartedly true.
It is totally true. It's and that's the problem. People in the science community are getting huge amounts of funding now, and climate change is their job. And if they don't produce something that says, we have a problem, we have to solve the problem, here's an analysis of the problem, if the problem goes away, they're out of a job. It's just that simple.
Yeah, absolutely. Sterling, while you stepped away, we were just covering essentially the incentive that there is to when funding comes from government, to put out research that supports the predetermined position. I don't know if you have anything you want to add into that. Not
really. I've written about this quite a few times. The corruption of science by big government. We didn't have this problem largely before the nuclear age. Government really got into funding big science.
Yeah, it's a good point.
When they were trying to create the bomb. And that's why very early on, Eisenhower warned of this in his last inaugural
I mean, his farewell address was, we've got to stop. We've got to be, he said, we beware of the equal danger. He was talking about the military industrial complex. He says, well, we got to beware of the equal danger of the scientific elite trying to take over and control us as government fund science. And that's, that's what's happening is climatology has received more money in the last 20 years, the field of climate research, than it had received probably cumulatively up to that point in its history.
Yeah.
When I think about the billions of dollars that have been spent on this that could have gone to cancer research or that could have stayed in people's pockets. But if it had to, if you're going to spend on science, it could have been spent on cancer or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or childhood cancer, or getting us off the earth and, establishing colonies elsewhere. And I think, God, could that money not have been better spent? Or pursuing pure science, not agenda driven, not political science, which is what this has become.
Yeah. I mean, just you brought up like cancer funding. I mean, we even saw during COVID that funding that was going towards cancer research was diverted away from that towards funding the COVID, like all of that going on. So, I mean, there is a cost benefit to all of this, especially when the cost of funding climate research that says we're nearing a catastrophe is infringing upon our rights. We had another one here I wanted to bring up. Lene, I don't know if you've noticed any comments you want to comment on.
Yeah, Kevin Burke just asked a pretty pointed question. So is the CO2 record more volatile than the ice core records show? Are we responsible for all the increase of CO2 as the IPCC states? And oceans have warmed little since the ice age. So I want to address the last part first. So oceans are going to warm slower. It is a lag period when it comes to warming water. It is more difficult to actually, I think it was Joe Bastardi who mentioned this on Twitter about a week ago. When you talk about ocean warming, it's kind of like any warming that we notice now there is more likely to do with geothermal or tectonic related type of heat and warming. If you think about it this way, is it easier to warm a pot of water with a blow dryer or with the stove? And that it's a lot harder to warm water up with air temperature than it is with a direct heat source.
That's great. I've never heard that.
Yeah, I saw that on Twitter the other day, and I was like, "Oh, that's really good, Joe. Thank you. Very cool." But so oceans have warmed, but not a lot, and it is more likely due to geothermal effects. And then, is the CO2 record more volatile than the ice core records show? I mean, probably. Ice core records can only be so good. And you think about it, you have periods of melting and refreezing, which will affect them. Also, ice moves in ways that people don't often think. It is constantly being crushed and deformed. So, the ice core records are good, but maybe not perfect.
And they're not actually they're not measuring temperature, and they're not actually measuring CO2. They're measuring they're measuring proxy molecules,
which is based on assumptions of how that works. Right. And they could be incorrect about that. It's the same thing with the tree ring issue. There are a lot more things than temperature that affect the width of a tree ring, like disease-related stress or precipitation, all sorts of stuff. And then, are we responsible for all the increase of CO2? No,
God, no.
That would be a big no, because our contributions are quite small compared to the known natural contributions, which includes off-gassing from a warming water. So, that was a good cluster of questions.
Just like with tree rings, they are much more. Trees are. There's something called the law of the minimum associated with plant growth that applies to everything from soybeans up to pine trees. And basically, the bottom line is that a tree's growth is limited by the least available factor. And so if you have, let's say, a situation where there's abundant sunlight, there's abundant temperature for the tree to grow, but you don't have enough water, even though maybe you've got enough fertilizer, the tree's not going to grow as much if it doesn't have enough water. Same thing goes if there's not enough fertilizer or there's not enough abundant sunlight. And that's why trees don't grow above, certain elevations. It's too cold for them, that sort of thing. The bottom line is that this law of the minimum, you could apply to Michael Mann's hockey stick and his tree ring studies and everything else. And yet the belief system behind this is that it only is a proxy for temperature. And that's absolutely false. They completely ignored this other part of science, which has been well known for over 100 years about the law of the minimum. Anybody who's a farmer or anyone who runs a greenhouse can tell you about the law of the minimum associated with plant growth. And yet these scientists completely ignore it.
Yeah, so we got a lot of questions in our last couple of minutes. Y'all are getting in some really good questions, and I want to get to some of them. We've got a couple here related towards volcanic activity and essentially emissions and just what's emitted out of that. So let me just find one of them. Here we go. Whichever one of you wants to jump in and cover it, that'd be great. But doesn't a volcanic eruption cause immense amounts of CO2 and CO and more than mankind?
It puts out a lot of is SO2, which blocks sunlight and cools the earth. That's why Krakatoa and Pinatubo and others have done, why the earth's cooled after these major eruptions. And when they talk about the mega volcano there at Yellowstone, if it goes off again, then they talk about it wouldn't be nuclear winter, it would be volcanic winter with people dying. But subsurface volcanoes, I think I saw someone said, they haven't been increasing. Well, no, that's not what the data show. The data show that around the Ring of Fire and around Greenland and subsurface activity in Antarctica is increasing. And and that, at least locally, say what you will, at least locally, that warms the ocean in and around those vents. And if you've got enough buoys near those vents, it's going to affect their temperature readings.
Yeah. So we got something.
One of our policy advisors, Arthur Vitorito, has written several recent peer-reviewed studies on the ocean on subsea volcanoes, but he's not the only one doing the work.
Yeah. So we got one here, which I assume we're all gonna disagree with to a degree. So the warming is modest and benign, but the CO2 increase, at least since 1958, is entirely anthropogenic. Nature is removing CO2, not adding it. We had 4.5 to 5 parts per million based on volume, and nature removes 2 to 2.5 of it. Anyone want to jump in on the claim that all carbon dioxide increases since 1958 is anthropogenic?
Well, there's a good portion of it that's anthropogenic, but
of course,
there is a human component. And his math right there basically says that. It's not entirely natural. Yes, we've contributed some to it. No doubt about that. No one denying that. But the bottom line is it a problem? Is it a crisis? No. Look at what happened since 1958. The world has thrived. We've had increases in crop yields and increases in productivity. We've had increases in population. Humans have thrived under this situation. And yet when it's gotten cold and stormy and wet and rainy, what have we had in the past? We've had potato famines, crop famines, disease and destruction, the Black Plague. All those things happened during cold periods in Earth's history and in human history. Humans do well under a warming scenario, not so well when it's cold, wet, and rainy.
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, one distinction I like to just bring up all the time is I think there's this idea that prior to the Industrial Revolution, human beings and nature were just like holding hand in hand, singing "Kumbaya," when in reality, it's like we're trying to survive like nature. It's the first thing you do if you're just dropped off in the middle of the jungle is like build a shelter to protect yourself from the elements. It's again not like sing "Kumbaya" or whatever. I just wanted to bring that up again. But yeah, what we do is we adapt to the situation we're in. We don't control the climate, which is essentially goes towards like we don't control individual weather events. What we can do is learn how to adapt from them, which we've been doing, which you've all said. There's less death from weather events as time goes on, despite the fact that population density is increasing. Weather events aren't getting worse. But yeah, so the entire idea that like the solution or the aim that we should have as people is to learn how to actually like adjust the weather knob of global weather events is ludicrous. What we need to do as people is like get better, I mean, to a degree, at predicting what will come and then learn how to adapt to it. Would you all agree with that statement?
Yeah, I mean, look, now they're tweaking computer knobs. I guess it's more benign than sacrificing virgins and volcanoes to control the weather, or or killing children in the Andes and burying them in pits to make the rain come. So it's more, it's a little bit more benign than that when they try and control it with the weather knob. But they're still in the situation of King Canute. His courtiers said, "Oh, you're so powerful, you can stop the waves," and he stood there and said, "Well, let's see how that works out." And of course, the waves didn't stop, and the water's laughing at his feet, and he says, "That's not right." And the point is, it's not right. We don't control the knobs.
Yeah,
CO2 ain't the only knob. There's lots of factors. And we don't control. Most of it. What we do, the thing that we do control is our response to a warming world, just like we controlled our response to a cooling world, as it was from the 40s to the 70s. And we can either make a situation worse with bad policy, or we can adapt, as we have done since the end of the last ice age, to multiple warmer and cooler periods. We've got better science now when we adapt. So I doubt that the next mini ice age comes. I doubt we're going to lose as many people to starvation as we did before.
Yeah. I was thinking about something you said, Sterling, earlier, where talking about, people tried to control the weather in the past by throwing virgins into volcanoes and that sort of thing. One thing humanity has not tried, and it may be applicable in the present, is throwing politicians into volcanoes.
Oh, man, I'm a non-aggression.
I mean, I think that might work, actually.
All right, I know we're at the hour mark here, but is there any other question that you all noticed on the side that you'd just like to comment on before we wrap this all up?
Gosh, there's so many good ones. It's hard to,
pick
to
one.
them. I feel bad that we can't be here forever and ever.
I know, right?
Well, we've had broadly more or less the same question a couple times in different ways regarding, let me find it. Let me find one of them.
Is it CO2 following temperature following that whole?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll pull something up. Yeah.
So I can't answer that one because I do recall when I was in a geochemical cycles course in college, I had a professor who brought up a chart that clearly showed, some they used proxies, but it was old temperature and CO2 data going back, tens of thousands of years. And it really clearly shows that a temperature change precedes a CO2 increase in that particular chart. And he was extremely dismissive of it. He goes, "This is a chart that you'll see sometimes, but we don't need to talk about it." And then he clicked on to the next slide. And I was like, what? That's just an insane thing to say. Like,
it's all of history doesn't apply.
Yeah,
you
this
can
was
learn
in a high level geochemical cycles course in school, and he didn't want to talk about it. And I remember looking around, and everyone had their heads down on their desk. No one was paying attention, and no one cared. And I was like, wow. This is why research today, you got to watch out, because a lot of these people just don't have the background information. Yeah. So,
or they do. I suspect he did, and it's inconvenient. Al Gore used that chart. Al Gore uses the chart. He's got this wonderful chart showing CO2 and temperature going along. But then when you blow it up, it turns out that temperature always follows. I mean, CO2 rise always follows temperature by 200 to a couple of hundred to 1,000 years.
Yep.
In his chart,
outgassing of the oceans.
Yeah, when you get to the details, and you can ignore that, like this guy that was teaching Linnea tried to do. We don't need to talk about that because that's the past. Oh, because we can learn nothing from the past.
Yeah, I always actually found this to be a very compelling argument, and also just like a very easy one to describe to people. And the way I've always done it is just say, like, imagine you took a can of Coke or Pepsi, we're not sponsored here, and you put it out in the middle of a field on a cold day and on a warm day. And after an hour, you open it. On the cold day, there's going to be very little like of a sound. That's the best I can do for the bubble sound. And which essentially means the gas in the soda is still like in the liquid. And then on a hot day, when you open it, it's going to foam. You're going to have this great amount of pressure buildup. And to a degree, that's how we can explain how carbon dioxide is following temperature. As temperatures increase and oceans warm, essentially carbon dioxide that's held in the ocean is released, causing there to be, and now this is from the Great Global Warming Farce documentary that came out a while ago. I love that documentary.
Yeah, it's a
but
well-known curve in chemistry, solubility curve of CO2 in water.
Yeah. So I mean, there is a correlation between carbon dioxide and temperature, and carbon dioxide does impact temperature to a degree, not to the degree they tell us, but largely it's that carbon dioxide is following temperature. It's not driving it. So they can easily show those, Al Gore can show his beautifully made charts and say, see, as carbon dioxide increases, temperature increases. Well, in reality, he's getting it basically the exact opposite, more so that temperature is driving carbon dioxide.
But the fact that it's both is part of the reason, that temperature both precedes and follows a CO2 rise is part of the reason why you don't get positive feedbacks in nature like that.
Yeah.
This is why we're probably not going to have runaway warming.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is it's a complex adaptive system, and like trying to describe it just based on one variable is just impossible. All right, we got to wrap up here. Honestly, there's just like tons of great questions coming in. I kind of wish we could keep going with it, but we'll be back next week to keep answering these. Thank you all for joining us. We're here every Friday at noon for the most part. We had our annual benefit dinner last week, so we weren't able to be on, but we will be going forwards. If you want to reach out to us, just Google the Heartland Institute, look for like our media address. Feel free to reach out with questions, comments. A couple people have commented in the on the YouTube broadcast, just as things related to that. Outside of that, not Twitter. Linnea, do you want to give people how they can follow you on Twitter?
Well, it's in the name. Well, it was in the name.
I will
when
get
it
rid
was
of the
on
comment.
the screen.
There you go.
Okay, right there.
Yep.
Easy peasy.
Anthony, I see you got the same thing. You can follow
Right.
Anthony at What's Up With That. And Sterling, you got anything you want to pitch to our viewers before we sign off?
Sign up for Climate Change Weekly and go regularly to Climate Realism, Climate at a Glance, and our other websites for timely information, not just on climate change, but a variety of other topics, and some of them like environment and climate news.
Yep. And we have our annual climate conference coming up. We'll be live streaming all of that. This will be the first conference we've had since we've been doing, these live shows with like great regularity and with also great engagement during them. So I'm honestly like excited for we're just going to have like a ton of scientists up there doing presentations all day. We'd love to just have you all watching, commenting while we do those. It's honestly great every year. But outside of that, thank you all for joining. We really appreciate you being here every week. We appreciate the comments, questions, and we will catch you next week. Peace.